Well, I'm only relating someone else's story, which is this dear old chap. He does look incredibly like Lord Lucan. You remember Lord Lucan, that rascal? And they were all. He was an Etonian who he said had been Lucky Lucan's fag, and he only has one eye that works, and he's a very dear friend of mine. I don't want to say anything unkind about him at all, because he's a very generous, nice man. But he was telling me this wonderful story of driving around in Devon. I think he was rushing off to see the Queen, actually, and he drove the wrong way round the roundabout, and the Devon police pulled him in and interrogated him on the roadside, and the policeman said, you realised you were going the wrong way round the roundabout, don't you? And he said, oh yes, yes. He said, I could well have been. He said, well, how do you account for that, sir? He said, well, this is very simple. I'm a very, very bad driver. And the policeman said, oh, I see, sir. Oh, well, in that case, he said, and touched his forelock and held the traffic up and then waved him on into the stream. And there's now that's what happens if you've got the right accent. Well worth cultivating it if you can't do it naturally.
I remember when I was a boy in St Ives, people used to doff their hats to the women.
Well, yeah, I was brought up to do that. Yeah, I was brought up to give my seat up on buses and all that sort of courtesy, but not anymore. Yeah.
You were also saying about when a member of the royal family came across at the Mount, what happened?
Yeah, just now.
Yes.
You don't want to hear that
Yeah, I
again.
do definitely. It's a classic.
Well, I was due with this chap Brian Skilton, who for a while had some very misplaced belief in my ability as a television personality. We were waiting to go on to St Michael's Mount to do a programme about it. I have to say I knew at the time nothing at all about St Michael's Mount, but I quickly learned that on telly it's of no advantage at all to know what you're talking about. All you need to be able to do is to say it fluently. And so I would stand in front of the camera and deliver this stream of bullshit and lies. And provided I didn't hesitate too often, this was acceptable. Anyway, we were waiting at the end of this long wooden thing, and we weren't allowed on the mount until this royal personage had come back. And finally a little boat chugged across, and there was a gaggle of local ladies there with bouquets of flowers ready to welcome the royal personage back onto the mainland. And he stepped onto the wooden thing, and they all rushed forward and shouting to him, welcome back, sir. They were saying, welcome back, your highness, or whatever, and proffering him these flowers. And he looked down on them, obviously, and he'd obviously been versed in what to say to the common folk. And he remembered one phrase, and he said to them, are you enjoying your holidays? And this is like the worst insult you could give to a Cornish lady, to mistake her for an emmet. And they all shouted at once, we live here, we live here. What's up with them, they were saying, what's up with them? We live here. And he by this time thought he couldn't think of anything else to say. So he was striding up the gangplank. And they pursued him angrily, shouting at him, what's up with him? What's up? We live here, they said. I thought it was terribly funny. I made 3 of a series with Brian Skilton. That was with Colin Wilson and Tony Sober, the naturalist. And Brian took us to, or sent us to various places in the west of England, and told us to research it, and then the next day be back again with the script already composed and memorised. Typical, what a hope. And we went, and then Brian filmed it, and they were desperately terrible programmes as far as I can remember. And I think I made some other things with him as well, and I made a programme about Wells Cathedral at one point. but I may have been with another lot, with the ITV or somebody. And that was an attack on the restorations they were doing on the West Front. They were tearing off masses of wonderful, very early, early English capitals and carvings on the West Front, and replacing them with fake, modelled up bits, which were being determined by art historians, lady art historians. And I thought, what a sort of mad idea that art historians can say how to make art. And these chaps were chiselling away and bashing off this stuff. I've got a couple of bits of it in the backyard there, which I've zealously kept. And they're actually very beautiful and interesting as examples of what Adrian Stokes used to call the will to form. I think, it was Vorringer. Sorry, I'm sounding pretentious now. It was Vorringer who coined that phrase, the will to form. That you form things, they just come out of your being. It's part physical, part mental, part emotional. Anyway, what was I talking about?
Didn't you get Henry Moore involved?
Yeah, John got Henry Moore. We started a campaign, and a whole group of us signed a letter. I wrote the letter to the Times, and we got very illustrious people to sign it. Betchman, Henry Moore, Pat Heron, Keith Critchlow, a whole lot of good eggs. And I think Mark Girouard, I can't remember all of them now. Anyway, it was an illustrious list of people. And the letter immediately drew a response from the Dean and people from the cathedral who were very upset and angry that we criticised their work. They saw the sculptures as being defective in that they didn't proclaim the Christian message. I saw them as being wonderful survivals of something which is unrepeatable. So that was the gist of the letter, was that it's better to have shattered, damaged fragments than fakes, which is what they were replacing things with. And we did, and they were actually replacing heads which had been knocked off by various iconoclasts in the past on the West Front, with some hack sculptor was knocking up phony, winsome, sentimental heads, and they were sticking them on these sculptures. And these are some of the greatest sculptures that had ever been produced in this country. They were really, truly wonderful. Anyway, that letter drew a long, long correspondence in the Times, and Henry Moore was one of our supporters, and came down to Wales, and John Schofield, with whom I'd collaborated on this thing, he went up and met him, and they spent a day, and they met the Dean, I think, who said, "Who is this Henry Moore? His sculpture's so awful. What does he know about it?" And all that, Anyway, it resulted in them stopping doing what they were doing to a large degree. We did save quite a few square inches of medieval carving. So that's a very bad description of what that campaign was about.
You can't really imagine them doing that in France or Germany, can you?
Well, they'd have done it already in France. There wouldn't be anything left to conserve. The French are bloody awful. They scrape and scrub away. I can imagine it. And the Germans, of course, have always replaced their ancient fabric on their buildings. I mean, you go to Austria, you go to wherever, and the buildings are all like brand new. So no, I'm afraid it does happen elsewhere. But there was, of course, that great movement started by dear old Morris and co, and subscribed to by the likes of Rodin, who actually joined the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings back in the 19th century to oppose all that destruction. And it was rampant across Europe. Every custodian of every church and cathedral felt it his or her duty to make it look brand new. And Morris and Ruskin and co pointed out that there was wonderful beauty and poetry and meaning in these ancient things which are still there redolent in the old stones. My dad had been an architect and my brother's an architect, and I collaborated with my brother for a long time, and well, still do. And I designed quite a lot of buildings, and to my astonishment they were built. And there was something very heady and thrilling about working out a problem. Well, the lovely thing about architecture, they're real problems to resolve. The problems one resolves in painting are of one's own making, largely. They're imaginary problems. But in architecture, you have to solve certain things. I mean, the bloody thing's got to stay up, and you've got to be able to walk through it and not bonk into things. It's got to have a sort of fluency of circulation, all those necessities. So it involved reason and rational thought as well as intuition. And I love that because I've always thought of art as being a synthesis of all these feelings, if it's any good. And so I find, and for about 10 years I worked very passionately at architecture. I remember being up half the night doing it all the time and still trying to paint during the day. And I became a sort of modernist architect, because I've always found those 20s, 30s buildings incredibly exciting. I've always loved them and still do. So that's how and then I came to teach architecture to my surprise. I taught in some very illustrious places. I once gave a lecture in Canada, in Halifax, on beauty. That was a reckless thing to do. I gave this lecture on beauty. I said the next day I walked past the university building, and the students had all come out on strike with placards saying, "We want beauty." There was a rebellion. They said they hadn't been taught about this facet of architecture called beauty. And anyway, I hastened by feeling rather guilty that I'd stimulated this outburst of student protest. Well, my idea of beauty in architecture was that it was the exact opposite to that of most planners, who seem to think of it as an optional extra you can tack on at the end. Style or beauty. I thought beauty was the will to beauty, the urge to beauty, that is to make eloquent coherence between all the parts of a building. That was what enabled you to solve the problems. It was through an eagerness to make the thing beautiful that you engaged and solved the very difficult, often very practical problems of architecture. That they were inseparable, in other words, and that's what my lecture was about. It was probably a very incoherent lecture, but anyway, these Canadian students thought it was just what they needed. I never found out what happened. They probably lynched the professor.
Did you, when working for 10 years on architecture, think of yourself as a very small person? Because you're thinking in terms of the building and imagine yourself in it.
Yeah.
And working with models.
Well, I used to work from drawing, because I've been taught, at the Slade and at West of England College of Art, ceaselessly to solve problems and engage problems through drawing. If I can see something on a page, I can relate to it in a way I can't otherwise. And when I taught my students through drawing, really, which was a mixture of observation and free experiment on the page. So
you're teaching them to think with their hand?
Yes, with their hands, with their eyes, with their, the whole thing coming together. I mean, drawing is a fantastically engaging occupation. I think of it as being one of the profoundest things you can do, drawing. Most drawing is taught as skill, is taught as facility, you get... I didn't like that idea. I saw drawing as a very profound matter. of solving and engaging problems, and of learning about the world as well. The look of things is so astonishing when you draw them. Most of the time, one only needs to look at things to identify them and not bonk your head. But when you draw things, you suddenly realise that a nose isn't as you expected. It's an extraordinary set of interrelationships, of facets and things, and it engages everything else around the head. And to explore those things is wonderful, I always thought.
So in a sense, you can scrumple it up afterwards because
you can do what you like with it.
Yes.
You can deconstruct it, you can reconstruct it in a matter of moments, and in architecture I found that invaluable. I always spent a long time drawing the site, pacing about it, and I developed a way of drawing my pacings. I would follow my movements on a page in a drawing, which was actually completely abstract sort of way of drawing, and not a way of drawing I'd been taught and which I found applicable to painting, but it sort of came through such as I have an ability to draw for painting. It came through that, and I'm waffling on now, aren't I? But I did find that it incredibly exciting that you could resolve these very difficult problems of a building which has to stay up and has to have elegance and eloquence and beauty and a sense of stability or whatever you wish to invest it with on a tiny piece of paper, and then a year later it's a fucking great structure you can go into and it keeps the rain out, and that's wonderful. I always thought it was marvellous, very exciting.
Do you think you prefer drawing to painting?
No, I don't. I find the two inseparable. I find the drawing part tends to come first because I learn through drawing, and I learn the direction in which I anticipate the painting is going to go. But the paint itself is such lovely stuff. It smells so nice, doesn't it? Paint, oil paint. I mean, I don't want to use disgusting acrylics. Oil paint's wonderful stuff, viscous and sticky, and the smell's wonderful, and it's real, and it's such a sensual thing, oil paint and on canvas. I love it. I love the whole craft of painting. I mean, one of my favourite books is Max Stirner's Materials of the Artist. I don't know if anyone reads it anymore, but it's a wonderful book. Various obscure German professors who develop mastic varnishes of incredible value. Anyway, I love it all. I love drawing. I love drawing for architecture, but I've stopped doing the architecture now because I was driven off that by Prince Charles and Co. I couldn't stand any more of that.
That's fair enough. So now you mainly paint and draw.
Yeah, that's all I can do now. I mean, I don't know. I haven't worked at architecture for a long time. I go up to Wales and see my dear brother. He's still doing, Tim Organ, he's still doing terrifically ambitious and imaginative new architecture up there, and having a demonic struggle with imbecilic planners. I mean, they are so uneducated and bovinely stupid and obstinate. The poor, and how my brother sticks it, I've no idea. I mean, I always think he's going to drop dead of rage. I know I would.
Do you still teach or lecture at all?
No, I don't. Nobody asks me anymore. They all think I'm a pain up the arse, I think, so I don't. I don't presume to teach anyone anything. I talk to my dog about it.
About your dog, can you? John said that you could do the whistlings of working men. Can you do any of that?
Well, it's a long time since I thought about this, but it always used to amuse me. And I had an old Slade friend called Al, and we used to share these jokes because life at that, when we were young in our 20s, life was all just a constant joke. I mean, I used to laugh so much I used to wet myself, and it used to bring on terrible asthma attacks, seizures. I'm amazed I didn't keel over dead from them. And I can remember one of the jokes we had was this wonderful ability that chaps doing jobs on buildings or whatever, plumbers and people, they launch into a well-known melody, and you come to the bit where it sort of resolves itself in the final few notes, and they then get it wrong, so that the Blue Danube would go off, suddenly go zoom down into some flat abyss of meaninglessness at the end, and that was the characteristic of working man's whistling, I always thought, and we always thought you could have terrific concerts and competitions of it to see who could find the most banal ending to the most beautiful melody.
Can you give an example?
Well, I'm trying to think of one. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, which is embarrassing, but I'm trying to think of one. You'll have to give me notice on that, Andrew, and I'll
okay.
prepare one.
Yeah.
We used to work very...
Waltzing Matilda might be one.
Well, that's good. Yeah. How does that go? Dun, dun.